It's honestly hard to believe what just went down. The Federal Reserve, in an unprecedented move just 3 minutes ago, has effectively blocked Donald Trump's latest financial maneuver, a scheme that would have given him extraordinary control over monetary policy. And get this, the decision came with a scathing legal opinion that didn't just reject his plan, it called it a constitutional violation. We're talking about the nation's central bank, an institution that prides itself on staying above the political fray, stepping directly into the ring to stop what they're calling an assault on the independence of American financial institutions. Warren Buffett, who rarely weighs in on political matters, just released a statement calling this the most dangerous threat to economic stability I've witnessed in 6 decades. This isn't just about interest rates or economic policy. We're talking about whether a sitting president can essentially commandeer the Federal Reserve, bypass centuries of institutional safeguards, and gain control over the nation's money supply for personal and political gain. And trust me, the fallout from this is going to be absolutely seismic. Let me fill you in on what's been happening behind closed doors. So here's the scoop on what's going down with Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve. Trump has been going after Fed Chair Jerome Powell for years now, hasn't he? Ever since Powell started raising interest rates back in 2018, Trump's been on the warpath. He's called Powell an enemy, said he has no guts, blamed him for every economic hiccup, and openly demanded that the Fed lower rates to basically zero. For someone who claims to understand economics better than anyone, Trump sure seems to hate the one institution designed to keep the economy stable through independent monetary policy. But here's where things get interesting. Trump wasn't just complaining on social media anymore. According to Politico's report from earlier this week, Trump's legal team had been working on a plan, a very specific, very calculated plan, to essentially take control of the Federal Reserve. The scheme involved invoking emergency executive powers under the National Emergencies Act, combined with a creative reinterpretation of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, to argue that the president has ultimate authority over monetary policy during times of economic crisis. And what would constitute an economic crisis? Whatever Trump says constitutes one. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent. That's not just a nice idea, it's fundamental to how our economy functions. For more than a century, the Fed has operated separately from direct presidential control specifically because the founders and subsequent lawmakers understood a basic truth. If politicians can manipulate the money supply for short-term political gain, you get inflation, economic instability, and eventually financial catastrophe. Look at what happened in Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, countries where political leaders gained control over the central bank and destroyed their economies in the process. The Fed's independence isn't some bureaucratic nicety. It's a firewall protecting the American economy from exactly the kind of political manipulation Trump was attempting. But Trump has never been comfortable with limitations on his authority. He sees checks and balances as obstacles, not features of democratic governance. So his team crafted this plan, and according to sources inside the administration who spoke to MSNBC on October 19th, they were preparing to roll it out right after the markets closed on a Friday evening. Classic authoritarian playbook. Announce major institutional changes when people are least able to respond. The plan would have allowed Trump to fire Jerome Powell, install a loyalist as Fed chair, and then direct that chair to implement whatever monetary policy Trump wanted. Need to pump up the stock market before an election. Lower rates. Want to punish political enemies by targeting specific sectors. You could do that too. Want to inflate away government debt at the expense of regular American savings. That's suddenly on the table. Reports from around October 22nd revealed just how agitated Trump was getting about this. He'd been having private meetings with economic advisors who told him the Fed's current policies were destroying his presidency and that he needed to take bold action to assert control. According to the Washington Post, Trump even told one advisor, "The Fed works for me. I appointed Powell. He should do what I say or I'll find someone who will." Talk about strong words. Essentially, Trump was calling Powell a traitor for not sticking to his exact wishes. And this wasn't a private conversation. Trump made sure to air his grievances publicly on Truth Social, making it clear that he was not happy with Powell's independence. This announcement sent shockwaves through financial markets because it raised all sorts of questions. If Trump, the president himself, could turn against the foundational principle of Fed independence, what did that mean for everyone else scrambling to maintain confidence in American economic institutions? Now, this isn't the first time we've seen this pattern from Trump. Trump's loyalty really only extends to himself. Whenever someone stops being useful or does something he doesn't like, he's quick to turn on them. We've spotted this pattern time and time again. Just think about how he turned on Jeff Sessions right after Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation. Sessions had been one of Trump's earliest and most loyal supporters. A senator who stuck his neck out when supporting Trump wasn't popular in Washington. But the moment Sessions followed legal ethics and stepped aside from the investigation, Trump began a relentless campaign of public humiliation. He mocked Sessions on Twitter, called him weak, undermined his authority, and eventually forced him out of office. All that loyalty meant nothing. Then there was Bill Barr. Trump loved Barr when he was acting as his personal attorney rather than the Attorney General for the United States. Barr wrote a memo criticizing the Mueller investigation before he was even appointed. He released a misleading summary of the Mueller report that gave Trump political cover. He intervened in cases involving Trump's associates. But when Barr wouldn't go along with Trump's claims about election fraud in 2020, wouldn't support the January SIP scheme, and publicly stated there was no evidence of widespread fraud, Trump turned on him viciously. Barr went from being Trump's most trusted law enforcement official to being labeled weak, scared, and a rhino in the space of weeks. And let's not forget how he distanced himself from Mike Pence when Pence wouldn't go along with the plan to overturn the election on January 6th. Pence had been the most loyal vice president imaginable. He defended Trump through scandal after scandal, never criticized him publicly, stood by him when other Republicans were fleeing. But when Pence told Trump he didn't have the constitutional authority to reject electoral votes, Trump threw him under the bus. He sixed a mob on him. People were literally chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," while Trump sat in the White House watching it happen on television. Even Kevin McCarthy faced a similar fate when he briefly criticized Trump after January 6th. McCarthy had to fly to Mar-a-Lago and essentially beg for forgiveness, degrading himself publicly to get back in Trump's good graces. Now, it looks like Jerome Powell is in the hot seat. This pattern is becoming all too familiar. You can show all the loyalty in the world and defend Trump every single day, but the moment you step out of line or cease to be useful, he'll toss you aside without a second thought. You see, Trump expected Powell to be his guy. After all, Trump appointed him. In Trump's transactional view of the world, that appointment should have bought eternal loyalty. Powell was supposed to keep interest rates low, keep the stock market pumping, and make Trump look good economically. But Powell had this quaint notion that his job was to maintain price stability and maximum employment, not to serve Trump's political interests. So, what did Powell do to tick off Trump? Well, it all boils down to this fundamental conflict between presidential demands and institutional responsibility. The impasse happened because Trump wanted the Federal Reserve to slash interest rates to near zero, essentially printing money to juice the economy and inflate asset prices, while Powell and the Federal Reserve Board were trying to manage inflation, maintain the dollar's value, and ensure long-term economic stability. Ultimately, these two positions are completely incompatible since no one was willing to budge. As Fed chair, Powell decided to take a constitutionally grounded stance. He maintained the Fed's independence, refused to bow to political pressure, and made monetary policy decisions based on economic data rather than presidential tweets. His approach seemed to be just following the law and doing his job. At first, Trump seemed to be on board with having a Fed chair who projected stability and competence. He appreciates loyalty and the notion of having his people in positions of power. But here's where things started to go wrong. But as Trump's frustration with economic conditions dragged into its second and third year, some serious issues started cropping up. Inflation concerns, international trade tensions, and stock market volatility were all happening, while the Federal Reserve was steadfast in holding their ground on independent monetary policy. Predictably, Trump began to shift his blame toward Powell personally. Polling from YouGov indicated that Trump supporters were increasingly frustrated with economic conditions and looking for someone to blame, and Trump was more than happy to point them toward the Fed. This was the moment Trump began to sweat a little. You see, Trump values winning above all else, maintaining the appearance of a booming economy, and overall having complete control over the narrative. He doesn't want to be tied to economic problems that undercut his brand as a business genius. That's definitely not the victory he seeks. And then Powell went ahead and made a move that, according to Trump, was a serious misstep. Powell started looking for ways to maintain the Fed's independence in the face of unprecedented political pressure and figured he should make public statements reinforcing that independence. He even considered giving speeches explaining why central bank independence matters for long-term prosperity. But then, when Trump caught wind of all this, he absolutely lost it. In Trump's eyes, making public statements about Fed independence is just a sign of disloyalty. Standing up to presidential pressure, that's pure betrayal. Any Fed official who dares to prioritize economic stability over political expediency is instantly labeled an enemy. Now, this left Powell in a tight spot. On one side, he really needs to maintain his credibility with financial markets, the economic community, and the American people to effectively do his job. The global financial system will drop confidence in the dollar like a hot potato if the Fed becomes just another political tool. On the flip side, he actually has to get down to managing monetary policy, controlling inflation, and maintaining employment. That means figuring out how to navigate unprecedented political interference, maintain institutional legitimacy, and protect the Fed's statutory independence. Here's the kicker. The tricky part is all of that requires some level of resistance to presidential demands and public defense of Fed independence. So Powell is caught in a bind. He can either keep trying to appease Trump, which means abandoning the Fed's mandate, destroying its credibility, and potentially causing massive economic damage. And that only makes the situation worse and paints the Federal Reserve as a compromised institution. Or he can do his actual job as Fed chair, which means standing firm on independence, making policy based on economic data rather than political pressure. But that'll definitely make Trump turn against him with full force. It's honestly a tough situation, and that's the mess Trump creates for institutional leaders. He demands complete loyalty and wants them to abandon their constitutional responsibilities without budging, but then he points fingers when the inevitable consequences unfold. He's not shy about tossing them under the bus whenever it suits him. This whole scenario is causing major stress within the Federal Reserve System and the broader economic establishment. If Trump has turned on Powell and is willing to publicly undermine the Fed chair he himself appointed, every financial institution leader is left wondering if they're the next target. Those moderates in the business community who were trying to balance support for Trump's tax cuts with concerns about institutional stability are now worried sick about being the next ones to get tossed aside. Meanwhile, the Trump loyalists believe Powell isn't aggressive enough in supporting the president's agenda and that he's too concerned with outdated notions like central bank independence. Things became even more intense when Senator Tommy Tuberville, one of Trump's most vocal supporters in Congress, broke away from traditional Republican support for Fed independence. He had been pushing for legislation that would give the president more direct control over monetary policy and criticized Powell for hurting President Trump's economic success. When someone as aligned with Trump as Tuberville starts attacking the Federal Reserve, you know we're in a world of hurt. Let me tell you, this brings us to the legal challenge that just landed. The Federal Reserve's Board of Governors decided to take unprecedented action. Just 3 minutes ago, they released a formal legal opinion drafted in consultation with the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, stating that Trump's planned executive action to seize control of monetary policy would be unconstitutional and void. According to CBS News legal correspondent Jan Crawford, this opinion didn't pull any punches. It pointed out that the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, as amended, explicitly establishes the Fed's independence from direct presidential control. The opinion quoted the statute directly. Members of the board shall be appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the Senate, but the president may not remove a member except for cause. It then cited Supreme Court precedent from Humphrey's Executor v. United States, which established that independent agencies with quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial functions cannot be subject to unrestricted presidential removal power. The legal process moved pretty quickly, and the Fed recognized the urgency. After all, every day Trump's plan remained viable meant another day of potential market chaos and institutional uncertainty. And let me tell you, the legal opinion didn't hold back with its language. It was a major blow for Trump. The opinion declared that Trump's planned action was constitutionally indefensible and represented a fundamental violation of the separation of powers and the independence essential to sound monetary policy. That's legal speak for saying, you've got no solid ground to stand on here. There's no legal validity to what you're doing. You're just abusing your power for political gain. The Fed's general counsel calling out Trump's plan by name created a real stir. It's a significant move, reminding Trump that he isn't above the constitutional framework that governs our institutions. This is a huge deal that doesn't usually happen in functioning democracies. When the central bank has to issue formal legal opinions blocking presidential actions, that's a 5-alarm fire for democratic norms. Legal experts are noting that we haven't seen the Federal Reserve take such a confrontational stance against a sitting president since Paul Volcker stood up to political pressure in the early 1980s. Andrew McCarthy, a former federal prosecutor and National Review contributor who's generally sympathetic to conservative positions, went on Fox News just an hour ago and made a statement that really should catch everyone's attention. He said that Trump's legal team would face nearly insurmountable obstacles defending this position in court, and that even the most aggressive interpretation of executive power can override clear statutory protections for Fed independence. Just think about that for a moment. This is coming from someone who's defended Trump through multiple controversies. And this is coming from a conservative legal voice on Fox News, not some liberal critic. Lawrence Tribe, a Harvard constitutional law professor, mentioned that this represents the clearest example yet of Trump attempting to dismantle the constitutional architecture that has protected American prosperity for generations. When legal experts from both sides of the political spectrum start tossing around terms like unconstitutional overreach and assault on institutional independence, that's the moment to really pay attention. So let's break down what this showdown could mean, because it's not just a captivating legal story. It has serious consequences for how our government and economy operate. First up is the immediate political fallout. Trump is already facing significant backlash due to multiple ongoing legal challenges, and his approval ratings among independent voters are taking a hit. Republican representatives are getting anxious about the upcoming 2024 elections, which is definitely adding to the tension. Trump just had the Federal Reserve publicly reject his attempt to seize control of monetary policy. And honestly, that's not the best look for him. Most folks in America have a good deal of respect for the Federal Reserve as a vital part of our economic system, even if they don't always agree with its decisions. Polling from Morning Consult shows that 62% of Americans believe the Fed should remain independent from political control. Democrats are definitely planning to take advantage of this situation. They'll argue that Trump believes he's above constitutional limits and does not hold the rule of law in high regard, and they'll have the Federal Reserve's own legal opinion backing up those claims. This is going to be Exhibit A in proving that Trump poses a fundamental threat to American institutions. You can expect to see this Federal Reserve opinion popping up in Democratic campaign ads, speeches, and debates throughout the election season. President Biden has already released a statement calling Trump's plan reckless and a threat to every American's economic security. Now, let's touch on what this means for the Federal Reserve itself. Jerome Powell has been working hard to keep the Fed out of political battles, wanting it to be viewed as above partisan influence. But by issuing this legal opinion blocking Trump's plan, he's waded right into a political controversy. Trump and his supporters are now poised to attack Powell, implying bias and questioning his motives, which complicates things for the Fed's image as a neutral institution. Yet, Powell probably felt he had no other choice. If he stayed silent while Trump attempted to seize control of monetary policy, the Fed's credibility and effectiveness would take an even bigger hit. International markets depend on confidence in Fed independence. If that disappears, you're looking at potential currency crisis, capital flight, and economic chaos. This situation shines a massive spotlight on the principle of central bank independence. At the heart of the issue is whether a president can just dismantle institutional safeguards and seize control of monetary policy whenever he feels like it. If Trump gets his way on this, it could totally change how our economic system operates. The Federal Reserve was designed to be independent precisely because history taught us painful lessons about what happens when politicians control the money supply. In the late 19th century, political pressure for easy money led to boom-bust cycles, bank panics, and economic instability. The Fed was created in 1913 to provide a more stable monetary system managed by experts insulated from short-term political pressures. For over a century, this system has mostly worked. The dollar became the world's reserve currency. American financial markets became the deepest and most liquid in the world. Economic crises still happened, but they were managed with credibility and expertise rather than political expediency. But Trump has always been uncomfortable with those limitations. He craves total control over everything, including institutions specifically designed to operate independently. If his seizure of Fed control is allowed, that's a significant boost to presidential power without any constitutional basis, and it opens the door for future presidents to misuse that power. Imagine if the president could just order the Fed to print money whenever spending got unpopular. Imagine if monetary policy became another tool for rewarding political allies and punishing enemies. That's not democracy. That's the road to economic authoritarianism. So the implications of this case reach far beyond just Trump and Powell. It's about shaping the structure of American government and economic policy for many years to come. Each time Trump brushes aside norms, attempts to violate statutory protections, or attacks independent institutions, it weakens our democratic systems. It starts making behavior that used to be completely unacceptable feel normal. Think about it. If Trump can attempt to seize control of the Federal Reserve, what's to stop the next president from doing the same? If he can just dismantle institutional independence whenever he wants, what's to prevent another leader from following that lead? These actions don't just disappear when Trump leaves office. They become precedents, part of our new reality, and that's pretty dangerous. Democracy relies on those norms and institutions, assuming that people in power will play by the rules, even when it's a bit inconvenient. When those norms crumble, democracy itself starts to falter. We've seen this pattern in other countries. In Turkey, Erdogan gradually seized control of the central bank, leading to currency collapse and economic crisis. In Hungary, Orban undermined institutional independence, and now Hungary faces EU sanctions and economic isolation. In Venezuela, political control of the central bank contributed to hyperinflation and complete economic collapse. The United States has always been different because we maintained these institutional firewalls. But if Trump succeeds in tearing them down, we lose that fundamental protection. Looking ahead to the 2024 elections, it's clear that all of this is going to have some significant effects. We're still 10 months out from those elections, but the narrative being set now is bound to influence how things go. If the story playing out is one of Trump battling every institution, from the courts to the Justice Department to now the Federal Reserve, and coming out on the losing side, that spells trouble for Republicans. Voters usually don't reward chaos and dysfunction. They want stability and competence. Right now, Trump isn't offering either of those. Warren Buffett's statement this morning is particularly significant. Buffett rarely comments on political matters, and when he does, markets listen. His warning that this represents the most dangerous threat to economic stability I've witnessed in 6 decades is not hyperbole from a partisan. This is one of the most respected investors in history, someone who's navigated every economic crisis since the 1960s, saying that Trump's attempt to seize Fed control is uniquely dangerous. That's going to resonate with business leaders, investors, and economically minded voters who might otherwise lean Republican. So expect Democrats to champion a message focused on protecting American institutions and economic stability. After years of chaos under Trump, there are folks who believe that if you vote for Democrats, economic policy will actually be managed by professionals again. They're promising no more constant constitutional crises or attempts to dismantle the Federal Reserve, just good old normal governance. That message might just hit home for a lot of voters, including some traditional Republicans who value institutional stability over partisan loyalty. So, here's the deal. The Federal Reserve just blocked Trump's attempt to seize control of monetary policy, issuing a legal opinion calling his plan unconstitutional. This isn't just about interest rates or economic policy. It's about whether we still have an independent central bank or whether the president can dismantle institutional safety.